Right now, I want you to completely put aside all those maps of Ukraine's eastern front. Forget those noisy Donbass headlines for a moment. Turn your gaze southward to that quiet spot where the war is really taking its toll. But curiously, no one is talking about it. I am talking about the Zaporizhzhia line. You might think it is quiet, but between January and early February, there were 180 to 250 clashes here every single day. This accounts for nearly 20% of all clashes across the entire front line. Now, the Russian side claims to have made gains in the Zaporizhzhia region, but I want you to ask yourself a question. If one of the world's largest armies loses everything it gained over 2 months in just 168 hours, can that really be called a victory? Or should we call it what it really is, a retreat? Think about the scale of this. The Russian army spent 2 full months in the Zaporizhzhia steppe. Over 60 days of heavy artillery fire, armored convoys, and endless waves of infantry resulted in only a few millimeters of change on the map and a few muddy trench lines on the ground. The Kremlin's unstoppable Vostok units wasted tons of steel trying to open the gates to the city. Since November 2025, these units had been systematically applying pressure along the Heliopol and Oleksandrivka axis. The goal was clear: to slowly erode Ukraine's defenses, sever its logistical lines, and create springboards for the final major offensive planned for this summer. Yet, the cruel irony of modern warfare revealed itself precisely at that fragile moment when the euphoria of victory began. By February 2026, the tables had turned. Everything gained over 2 months was erased in just 7 days when Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade mobilized. The numbers simply do not lie here. Russia's advance time was 60 days. Ukraine's recapture time was just 7 days. The depth recaptured is surprising but true, exactly 9 to 9.5 kilometers. Just imagine the scene on the ground. They had to abandon and flee the trenches they had dug inch by inch over 2 months, the depot where they had stockpiled ammunition, and the command centers they had established, all lost within just 1 week. So how did Russia's massive war machine come to a standstill? How did it get stuck in the mud like a giant, while everyone's eyes were fixed on the hell in the east? How did that silent fracture that changed the course of the war occur in the south, in the least watched corner of the map? The picture you are about to see is not just a territorial gain. It is an anatomy of how disconnected the Russian command structure was from the reality on the ground, and how Ukraine managed to deliver the most deadly blow at the most unexpected moment. This drama unfolding in the steppes was not a random clash of nameless soldiers. It was a head-on collision between two different military doctrines, two elite structures. Without knowing the players on the ground, we cannot understand the value of these 9.5 kilometers. Facing us were the most prestigious, but also the most worn-out units of the Russian army. The Airborne Division, Russia's elite paratroopers, had been used as fire extinguishers on every critical front since the beginning of the war. However, at Heliopol, their elite status did not protect them from Ukrainian artillery. The 7th Marine Infantry Brigade, brought in from thousands of kilometers away in Vladivostok, put up fierce resistance in the steppe warfare, but failed to coordinate. The 7th Motorized Infantry Brigade, the main backbone providing armored support, was among the first to be forced to retreat, leaving their armored vehicles behind in Ukraine's rear. On the Ukrainian side, an unexpected turnaround marked the scene. The Ukrainian General Staff shifted a very special force here within the Southern Operational Command, the 24th King Danilo Mechanized Brigade. This brigade, one of the most established and battle-experienced units in the Ukrainian army, is known as the Steel of Western Ukraine. Instead of Soviet-style cumbersome maneuvers, this brigade applied NATO's standard combined arms tactics. Infantry, tank, and drone operators moved as one. They were accompanied by the 24th Mountain Assault Brigade and Special Operations teams from the Border Guard. The dynamics of the battle were fascinating. While Russian VEDV units attempted to defend their positions, Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade flanked them. While the Russians were expecting pressure from the front, Ukrainian special forces infiltrated along the Yancha River and surrounded them from the flank. The Ukrainian army seized the opportunity presented by the excessive overconfidence of the Russian buildup in the area and the momentary blindness in their communication network. What began was not a large-scale counteroffensive. It was a tactical counterattack, but the results were strategic. So, how did such a large area change hands in such a short time? The answer to this question lies not only in the courage of the soldiers on the ground, but also in the dark side of technology. Things get even more technical here. There is a horrific detail that Russian military bloggers try to hide in their report, but admit between the lines. Most of the 7-day offensive took place at night. So why did they choose the night? Because this is where the biggest gap between between Western technology and the Soviet legacy emerges thermal vision and night combat capability. The American-made Bradleys and Swedish-made CV-90s used by Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade have superior thermal systems that turn the night into day for them, while their opponents were left fighting in the dark. Imagine a modern battlefield where, suddenly, all the high-tech gadgets go dark. That is exactly what happened at Mariupol. The Russian defenses just melted away under Ukraine's electronic warfare systems and relentless drone pressure. It gets almost absurd. Russian soldiers, realizing their modern communication devices were dead, actually tried to go back to Cold War-era wired telephone and insecure civilian radios. You can guess how that ended. Ukrainian intelligence picked up these simple signals instantly and directed artillery fire right onto the Russian command centers. It was not just the Starlink outage causing chaos. Ukraine seized this moment to deploy a robotic warfare doctrine that feels like something out of a movie. While Russian soldiers tried to communicate from their trenches, they were rained upon by new generation interceptor drones operated by the SBU Alpha Group. Russia's reconnaissance drones, specifically the Orlan 10 and Zala, were destroyed one by one in the air by Ukrainian hunter drones. Having lost their eyes in the sky, the commanders of the 49th Combined Arms Army, especially the personnel of the 7th Military Base, could not see the approaching danger. What happened next resembled a science fiction movie. On the snowy plains of Zaporizhia, Ukraine deployed robotic ground vehicle, or UGVs, which laid anti-tank mines before putting human soldiers at risk. Russian armored units, particularly the 89th Tank Regiment and the 10th Tank Regiment, were driven into these robotic minefields while attempting to retreat. T-72 and T-90 tanks were blown up by explosives placed by an invisible hand. Drone operators attached to the 98th Airborne Division attempted to salvage the situation on the Kherson and Zaporizhia border. However, even the Molia-2 fixed-wing drones they used were rendered ineffective under Ukraine's electronic warfare umbrella. This situation, described by NATO officials as a command and control impasse, exposed the Russian army's greatest weakness, which is centralization and technological dependence. Without Elon Musk's technology, Russia's 21st century army reverted to the cumbersome and blind structure of the 20th century. While Russian military bloggers vented their anger on Telegram, the reality on the ground was much more brutal. The 151st Motorized Rifle Division and its famous 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment were ordered to move south to relieve pressure on Kurikov. However, due to communication breakdowns, these orders did not reach the units in time or correctly. The breakdown in the chain of command created large gaps in the front line. Ukrainian forces took back strategic points such as Zielnitsa and Puki, taking advantage of this Russian lack of coordination. The Russian Basto Group Command called in the 3rd Army Corps and the 72nd Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade from reserves to remedy the situation. However, foggy weather conditions and malfunctioning satellite communications turned the arrival of these reinforcements at the front into a nightmare. Russian convoys that got lost on the roads were ambushed and ran out of fuel, becoming easy targets for Ukrainian artillery. Due to all these risks, the Russian military command was unable to carry out sufficient logistical shipments in the region. This situation doubled Ukraine's advantage on the southern front line. On the other hand, Ukraine's operational success does not seem to be limited to Zaporizhia. According to NATO intelligence reports, Russia's loss in this region threatens the land bridge to Crimea. The withdrawal of the 58th Army means that the gates to Melitop and Berdansk are being forced. Russia may be forced to withdraw troops from other fronts, particularly Donbass, to close this gap, which would be a strategic move easing Ukraine's defense in the east. There is even fear in Kremlin corridors that Ukraine could extend beyond the Melitop-Berdansk line all the way to Crimea. Therefore, the big move that has been discussed for months and whispered about in the press has finally happened. The Kremlin has begun withdrawing its most elite troops from the hottest conflict zones in Ukraine, that is the very heart of the front, and amassing them in Crimea. Consider this. A commander withdraws his troops from the front for two different reasons. Either he has won the war, or there is a much bigger, much more vital fire behind him. For Russia, it is the latter, and that is why the shipments to Crimea are mind-boggling. First, we need to take an X-ray of this major military movement on the ground, because what we are seeing is not a routine troop rotation. Our intelligence reports and confirmed information from the field show that Russia is pulling back units it defines as elite units that under normal circumstances should be at the forefront of the offensive. In particular, it has been determined that elements of the 18th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, the Hispaniola units known as the Spanish Brigade, Brigade and the 106th Airborne Division, considered the pride of the Russian armed forces, have entered the Crimean Peninsula. These are not ordinary infantrymen. They are the Russian army's best trained, best equipped, and most battle-hardened soldiers. The first question that comes to mind is, why is Moscow confining its highly offensive paratroopers to a defensive line? The answer actually lies in Ukraine's recently developed asymmetric warfare capabilities. The Russian command has bitterly acknowledged that the current air defense personnel in Crimea are inadequate against Ukrainian UAVs and missiles, and that their reaction times are too slow. These elite units are being sent to Crimea in a so-called fire department role. Their mission is very clear: to stop the panic in Crimea, to plug the holes in the air defense umbrella, and to teach other units, which have long failed to shoot down Ukrainian UAVs, how to do the job. In other words, Russia has decided to use its sharpest sword on the front line as a shield. This is defined in military literature as strategic paralysis, and is the clearest picture of helplessness for an army. But the real tragedy begins right here. While Russia tried to turn Crimea into a fortress at the expense of weakening the front, the Ukrainian army struck that very fortress as well as Russia's most trusted oil and radar facilities, landing a blow to Moscow's face. So Putin has now both emptied the front and failed to protect Crimea. Russia's most elite paratroopers and air defense experts rushed to Crimea like firefighters. However, Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicles riddled Russia's billion-dollar air defense systems with holes. Let's dive into the heat and details of the incident, because this attack is not just a simple explosion. The attack took place before the end of January. Today's picture was formed by the effects of this attack. Unmanned aerial vehicles coordinated by the Alpha Special Operations Unit of Ukraine's Security Service, the SBU, struck the Tamantes oil terminal, considered Russia's logistical heart in the Black Sea. That night, the skies over Crimea and Russia's Krasnodar region in the interior witnessed one of the most sophisticated drone attacks seen since the start of the war. The targets were not only military bases, but also Russia's energy infrastructure, which finances the war. This is no ordinary depot. It is one of the largest complexes in the Black Sea region, processing crude oil, petroleum products, and liquefied gas. The attack was so meticulously planned that it directly targeted technological pipelines and oil storage tanks. The leaking petroleum products caught fire, engulfing an area of approximately 7,000 square meters in flames. Can you imagine? Russia's most secure billion-dollar energy terminal is burning despite the withdrawal of so many air defense units from the front line. According to initial estimates by experts, the estimated material damage caused by this attack alone is over $50 million. However, the real damage is not in money but in prestige and logistics. Russia cannot even protect its most critical facility on its own territory behind the front line. This fire is turning not only oil into ashes, but also the trust in the Russian army. Now please pay attention here, because there is a much more striking, much more technical detail in the military aspect of this. Ukrainian forces did not just hit the oil with this attack. The real target was Russia's air defense. In modern warfare, if you cannot see your enemy, the missiles you have are meaningless. According to information confirmed by the Ukrainian General Staff, Russia's most advanced radar systems were targeted in the attacks in Crimea. The 59N6E Protivnik GE, 55ZH6 Nebo-U, and 55ZH6M Nebo-M radars were hit. These names may sound technical to you, but let's simplify it. The Nebo-M radar is a technological marvel worth hundreds of millions of dollars, developed by Russia to detect stealth aircraft and ballistic missiles, and considered the brain of the ES-400 system. When you hit this radar, you blind the ES-400 battery in that area. A billion-dollar air defense system becomes a pile of metal that cannot see its target. This is precisely Ukraine's genius.